Welcome everyone to CoasterGuy23 review number 7. That's right, after a brief hiatus, I'm back, and today we're talking about a fun one. And by fun one, I'm talking about a fun ride with a funny story. It took everybody by surprise when it was announced, and it is kind of a weird fit, but it low-key works at the park that it's at. This ride so far has been a smash hit for this park, as it's been drawing huge lines, is immensely popular with both the GP and enthusiasts, and has been extremely reliable despite including complex technology. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about Siren's Curse at Cedar Point. Siren's Curse was originally purchased by Energylandia in Poland and was set to be the first prototype of Vekoma's new-gen tilt coaster. While I'm not aware of the exact details of the situation, I believe Energylandia's poor financial performance led to this ride never being built. However, this decision to not build it came after Vekoma had already manufactured all of it. Naturally, Vekoma started looking for a new buyer for this roller coaster that they had already designed and manufactured. Six Flags Entertainment, who we know loves a good first drop gimmick, reached out to Vekoma and agreed to buy the already manufactured coaster and send it to, you guessed it, Six Flags Mexico. All the track and supports made it all the way down to Six Flags Mexico, where it sat in a parking lot ready to be assembled. However, just as site clearing was about to begin, some locals from Mexico City stepped in and blocked the construction project due to some protected trees that the site would be removing. Whether Six Flags Entertainment explored another option at Six Flags Mexico, I don't know, but whatever it was, it didn't work out and the ride was shipped up to the next possible location for its assembly, that being Cedar Point. To make room for it, all Cedar Point had to do was knock out some old dorms and reroute the road a little bit, and all of a sudden, boom, we have a Vekoma tilt coaster at Cedar Point. So it's quite the journey this ride has been on, from being installed at Energylandia to Six Flags Mexico, but all of a sudden it finds itself at the roller coaster capital of the world, even though that was never its original intention. Even when you look at the stats, this doesn't scream Cedar Point record-breaking roller coaster. It definitely screams more of a Vekoma tilt coaster prototype, which after all, this is what this ride was designed to be. Siren's Curse has a height of 161 feet, and that is at the top of the tilt track after it has tilted. The actual tower itself I estimate to be around 130 feet, so this thing looks tiny in the Cedar Point skyline, especially next to Valraven and Top Thrill 2's Spike. Coming off that 160-foot height, we have a top speed of 58 miles per hour, which is reached at the bottom of the first drop, and a track length of 2,966 feet, just short of 3,000 feet. So definitely on the shorter and smaller end, especially for a park like Cedar Point. But if you've seen any of these reviews so far, you know that I really don't take any counting stats into account. Sure, they can help with making your ride more intense and feel faster with more height and speed, but I definitely care more about layout, element sequencing, and forces. Sure, I'll always take a tall ride over a smaller one, but you can more than make up for that with smoothness, forces, rapid fire elements, different kinds of elements, that kind of thing. Now, let's jump into this ride's manufacturer for a second. Vekoma. Vekoma truly has one of the wildest stories of any roller coaster manufacturer right now. Not only would I say this story is a one-off in roller coaster manufacturers, but it's a one-off for businesses in general. Not even 20 years ago, Vekoma's main selling models were the suspended looping coaster and Boomerang. For enthusiasts, you're well aware of what these models mean, but in case you aren't, these are two of the worst and most frequently complained about models in the entire coaster business. Boomerangs can be a little hit or miss because some parks better maintain them than others, and some have different restraints. Some got the hard over the shoulder, some got the vest, so those you can actually get a good ride if you find the right one. Suspended looping coasters, though, I have not ridden a single one that I have enjoyed a single second of. Even the alleged best Vekoma SLC, Fly the Great Nor'easter at Maurice Piers, I find to be pretty unenjoyable. However, somehow, someway, parks bought enough Boomerangs and SLCs to keep Vekoma afloat for years. If any other business in any other industry consistently provided this bad of a product to its customers, there's just no way it would have stuck around for this long. However, Vekoma persevered and managed to stay afloat. And during that time, when the suspended looping coaster and Boomerang lost steam, they were able to use modern engineering and reinvent themselves and created their new Vekoma New Gen track and their Vekoma New Gen trains that are used here on Siren's Curse. And let me tell you, Vekoma did a total 180 from some of the worst track and trains in the industry to some of the absolute best. I still can't even fathom it sometimes. We've seen an industry, especially in the coaster business, of so many companies going down because they refuse to adapt new technology, such as aerodynamics, for example. Vekoma, however, put forth the time and effort to reinvent themselves and create a product that was infinitely better than what they used to put out in the past, and I give them major props for that, as that is not an easy thing to do. And hey, I'm all here for it, because as you'll see later in this review, I'm a really big fan of these new modern Vekomas, and I think Six Flags is too, so this won't be the last we're seeing of them at Six Flags parks. And for its specialty, of course, Siren's Curse contains Vekoma's newly engineered tilt track. This is the first tilt coaster that has been built anywhere in a very long time and is the first ever in America. You may see tilt track and think, well, B&M dive coaster gimmick, layout not that strong, but no. Siren's Curse, in addition to its gimmicky tilt track, has an airtime packed layout that keeps you guessing, has inversions, has a high pace and takes elements in rapid succession, and has a great variety of elements. The layout following the first drop gimmick is so much better than something like a B&M dive coaster like Valraven, which I'm sure I'll do a review on in the near future. Siren's Curse's layout overall features 13 total elements, 10 of which are airtime moments, 2 are inversions, and 1 maneuver. The maneuver is the tilt track itself, the 2 inversions are the 2 inline rolls that Siren's Curse has, and every other element you see here is an airtime moment. Siren's Curse has a drop-to-break ride time of 54.54 seconds. For Siren's Curse, there can be some debate onto where the actual drop starts. Does it start at the beginning of the tilt? Does it start as you climb onto the tilt? Does it start after the tilt releases? To me, the tilt track absolutely counts as a roller coaster-like maneuver and adds to the thrill of the ride. Thus, I feel it deserves to be included in the ride's drop-to-break time. So, the drop-to-break time starts when the tilt track begins moving upward. To be fair to B&M dives, when I review those in the future, I will also count the hanging break that those possess as part of their ride time as well. Because again, the hanging break is when the ride starts to get thrilling. And the whole point of the drop-to-break metric is to measure how long the ride actually thrills you. Moving on to the force chart, we can see that the tilt track has an interesting force profile. You start flat to the earth, so you're feeling that 1G downward that you normally feel while sitting or standing. Then, as the tilt track tilts up, that 1G of force shifts to your chest, as your chest is pointing straight toward the ground. Thus, the 1G of force now transfers to longitudinal force, and we are feeling 0 in the vertical force department. After that is when our spiky layout begins, and like I said, I love when the force chart shows some good spikiness, as that indicates rapid succession between elements. Especially on sections like the airtime hills at the end and the triple down, you're really going to feel that pop, pop, pop force, with strong, noticeable airtime with each pop. Additionally, Siren's Curse has some actual good positives to it, nearly reaching 4Gs at multiple points and actually going over 4Gs at the bottom of the first drop. I believe Siren's Curse accomplishes this through its curvy transitions. The bottom of the first drop has a tight curve. After the first airtime tilt, there's a tight curve. The airtime knot has strong curves going into and out of it. With its twister layout, Siren's Curse has to turn the train a lot. In order to make turns take up as little amount of time in the layout as possible, these turns are taken quickly, thus providing strong positive G-forces. Let's review all these elements and forces one by one as we go through the POV. Starting off, we leave the station straight ahead and enter a relatively fast lift hill, and it's at this point where the onboard audio kicks in. You guys know that I'm not the biggest theming person, and when you ask me what I love about Siren's Curse, the onboard audio is not the first thing I'm going to say, but man, is it a nice touch on this ride. Just gives that extra layer of immersion and just gives the ride some extra aura. And the sound of the sirens is kind of terrifying and unsettling. Now, we roll towards the tilt track. This little slow motion entry while you're still upright gives you a great chance to take in the surrounding views. Siren's Curse does not rush the tilt process at all, and overall it just helps build suspense and make the tilt feel even more memorable. As we roll ahead, we eventually lock into position, and then the track starts to tilt. Not after a long pause though, as it's just you, the onboard audio, your fellow riders, and the Cedar Point skyline up there. Once the track starts to tilt, the creaking noises begin, and your field of view just shifts from the skyline down to the concrete pavement and the guests below. I'll do my best to describe what the tilt feels like here, but it's really something you gotta just try for yourself to get the full experience, as it's certainly a unique one. In the front rows, it kind of feels like the tilt folds underneath itself as you get closer to the connection point of the drop. Thus, your car ends up lower in height than it was when the tilt started. To achieve this, it feels like the restraint is pushing down on your lap, rotating you 90 degrees in the process. The front, of course, also has the added fear factor of seeing a disconnected track directly in front of you. On my second row ride, the track ending didn't really strike fear into me like I thought it would, but if you're GP and you're newer to roller coasters, I can see how this is absolutely terrifying. Now, in the back rows, the tilt raises you higher in the sky, and thus, your seat feels like it's pushing you up from the bottom. Additionally, in the back, you really can't see exactly what's going on until the train is fully locked at 90 degrees pointing downward. And obviously, the added height increase is going to make that first drop just feel a little bit longer and more intense. For those reasons, I can see the argument for both ways, but I definitely prefer the tilt in the back. And for as gimmicky as this really is an incredible sensation to experience. Maybe I'm just biased because of the novelty of it, but I'll take this 10 times out of 10 over the drops on B&M dives. Would I want this to replace every traditional roller coaster drop? Absolutely not. But I absolutely see the value in every single park having a drop that is a tilt like this. This element is about to absolutely carry Siren's Curse's maneuver score. Once we're locked in 90 degrees, we wait a few more seconds and all of a sudden, we plunge down this twisting drop that takes you over this small water feature. In the front row, not gonna lie, this first drop is pretty underwhelming. It just feels so shallow and really not that fast. In the back though, you really get some good snap on that twist, and it pulls out into some nice intense G-forces where that 4G comes from in the force chart familiar. Overall, this drop is not bad, but for a tilt coaster, you just want it to last a little bit longer and have a more intense pull out. Like you want to feel like you're tilting and then falling and you're going to go straight through the earth before you pull up at the last second. This drop just doesn't feel like that, and I just think it's just because of the profiling of this ride model with the curve. It's just not my personal favorite, but it's still good, especially in the back rows. Up next, we have this airtime hill that transitions into kind of this diving curve. And this is an element that's featured on a lot of these new gen Vekomas. The way the Vekoma profiles these, really only the front half of this element actually delivers some sustained airtime. And thus, if you know how double ups and double downs work, the front rows are really going to be where this airtime moment delivers the most. When you think about a traditional airtime hill, those back rows are really going to get the most airtime when the airtime hill is transitioning down towards the ground, because the back is pulled over the top at a high speed as the train in front speeds up and pulls it along with it. However, on this element, that back half of that airtime hill is replaced with this curve, which of course replaces the airtime with positives. Thus, the airtime in the back rows on this element is kind of underwhelming. With an airtime score of 16.88, that's not bad and is probably an ejector pop, but you really want more than that from your first big airtime hill on this ride. I feel like the fix is there too. You just have to make the airtime actual curved section last a little bit longer and for the train to dive out later. That'll give the back rows just a little bit more track length to work with and actually get them pulled over the top and into some more airtime. In the front rows though, this element is excellent as you really get thrown out of your seat and then quickly into this twisting motion. It's really quite fun. 16.88 is not bad for the back row, but ideally you want more, and it can be fixed with just a slight profiling change. Up next, we had the first of two high-speed heartline rolls. I've seen these called a couple different things in different places, but to me, this is definitely a heartline roll. And the G-force chart reflects that as we get almost -1 G of hang time in the middle of this roll. This roll also ends higher than you started as you pitch upward into the next element. I don't have too much to say about this element besides that it's really flowy, fun, and overall an awesome inversion. Up next, I'm going to talk about elements 4, 5, and 6 together, which make up this twisted triple down. This sequence is really something and shows the creativity that Vekoma has that I love. Right after the heartline roll, the first part of this triple down is this little twisted airtime hill, followed by a downwards braking wave turn, and then finally just a traditional step down underneath the tunnel. Obviously, these elements are all traversing downwards, thus the back rows are going to hit them with more speed than the front rows. So if you want this triple down to really pop, sit in the back rows. You'll just take each element with that much more speed. The respective airtime scores of these three elements are 11.73 for the twisted airtime hill, 16.85 for the braking wave turn, and then finally 16.91 for the step down underneath the tunnel. Funny enough, the braking wave turn and the step down have a very similar airtime score to the giant airtime hill that follows the first drop. This puts emphasis on my point that first hill really should deliver more, because there's no way these elements that take just a little over 3 seconds combined should have the same amount of airtime as the big hill that follows a 164-foot drop. But on the more positive side, you really do feel the pop of all three of these double down moments. With the twistiness in between and the maneuvering downhill, I just can't get enough of it. Honestly, an element I would probably compare this similarly to is the Wildcat's Revenge double down, but that's just nowhere near as complicated and as fun as this in my opinion. I'll take this all day over that, even if this doesn't have the strong punch of laterals that Wildcat does. These elements are just flat out better. I also probably should have mentioned by now that the onboard audio is fully transformed into metal music that begins as soon as the tilt track releases you. So that's well underway at this point as you enter the next element, which is what I'm calling the airtime knot, and knot as in a shoelace knot, K-N-O-T. I call it this because the ride starts with a 180-degree turn that leads into a quick airtime moment, followed by a 360-degree helix that wraps back into itself, kind of forming what looks like a knot shape. I don't know, just go with it. While the airtime knot is a fun maneuver, it unfortunately is the element that disappointed me the most on Siren's Curse, as the actual airtime pop itself is really weak and barely even noticeable. Watching the element back, you really can see that there's just not much airtime curvature there, thus resulting in an airtime score of only 6.93. Which is still decent, but looking back at the force chart, only about 0.3 negative G for about 0.4 seconds. That's just not going to give you a very strong moment, unfortunately. Like the hill to dive at the start of the ride, this element could just benefit from some slight reprofiling just to give you that extra airtime pop that you would get between those quick maneuvers. That could make this a really overall well-rounded element. As you twist up, never see the airtime pop coming, quick pop, and then twist back into yourself. The execution just could be better in my opinion. We now enter the latter half of Siren's Curse, where we begin with pop number 1. Pop 1 is the element that took me the most by surprise on Siren's Curse, as I remember thinking on my first ride that this is by far the strongest airtime moment on Siren's Curse. And when I got back and ran the numbers, I was correct. This element has an airtime score of 28.10, making it the strongest airtime moment on Siren's Curse, with it not even really being particularly close. This element clears over 1G in strength and lasts for about 0.4 seconds. That is a serious pop of airtime there. This is what the airtime knot should have felt like, and even this is really not that hard to do, as there's not that much airtime hill curvature. It's just taken at a high rate of speed, and the back gets yanked over the top. If you had the airtime knot like this, and then this element still after it, those two pops of airtime would be flat out awesome. But instead, this one kind of stands out on its own and catches you completely off guard if you're a first time rider. Up next, we have the second Heartline roll, and this one feels pretty similar to the first one, except you're just not traveling as fast, thus the roll feels a little bit tighter actually, and you're not moving upward, and instead it stays completely flat. I don't really know which of these two rolls I prefer. The sensation in terms of forces is very similar. I'll probably take this one just because it's a little tighter and a little bit lower to the ground. These are probably the best inline rolls I've ever done though. Up next is an ejector turn. Very similar actually to what's on Wildcat's Revenge following the 0G stall. This one's just not quite as pronounced and is just a little bit smaller in size. For anyone who's unfamiliar, this element's just a hard cut to the right where you break out a little bit, giving you a nice pop of airtime while sideways. This particular ejector turn gives an airtime score of 14. This, combined with the previous pop and the pops that are to come, this half of Siren's Curse really has a great pace to it and just gives you ejector pop after ejector pop. This one in particular mixes it up from the other pops too by being sideways. Then we have two more pops. They're both pretty similar to the first pop that we did, as they both move side to side and give you a strong pop of ejector airtime that's not very sustained. I just love how Siren's Curse continuously hits high negative G-forces even this late in the ride, and in rapid succession. With these two moments being later in the ride and with less speed than the first pop, they're not going to score quite as high, with the first pop scoring a 15.89 and the second pop scoring a 16.65. To me, this final sequence of airtime moments, in addition to the twisted triple down, really shows Siren's Curse's pace, twistiness, airtime pops, and smoothness, which are all its best qualities in my opinion. And with that, the heavy metal music stops as we hit the brakes, and that'll conclude this POV breakdown of Siren's Curse. Looking back at Siren's Curse's airtime moments, it had 10 of them. All of them were provide ejector, except for the airtime knot and the break up at the end, which I forgot to mention had a score of 2.15, which is super insignificant. But anyway, the break hop and the airtime knot are really the only two elements on Siren's Curse that don't provide some form of ejector, even though none of them are, I would say, are super sustained. Pop 1 is definitely the shining moment with the score of 28.1, as it just holds that sustained level of negative G for the longest. Pop 2, Pop 3, and the final step down of the twisted triple down all kind of have pretty similar sensations, just these strong airtime pops in the 15 to 16 range. The ejector turn and the second part of the twisted triple down both provide a nice sideways moment of ejector, and the first part of the twisted triple down is really just a moment you don't see coming, and is just a nice twisted moment of airtime. These 10 moments combine to produce an airtime score for Siren's Curse of 146.09, and that's across 6.08 seconds of airtime. That score lies between Velocicoaster and Wildcat's Revenge, but what sets Siren's Curse apart from those two is that it gets there through routine ejector pops that all have pretty similar strength aside from Pop 1, which is stronger than the rest. Whereas Velocicoaster and Wildcat rely on at least one or two sustained ejector moments. To get a total score of 146.09 with only 6 seconds of airtime, you have to have some pretty strong airtime moments, and Siren's Curse does do that. But like I said, with the hill to dive and airtime knot, it has potential to raise this score even higher if Vekoma just profiled these elements a little bit differently. Moving away from the element by element specifics and more into the bigger picture stuff, first up we have theming, and Siren's Curse is without a doubt the best themed thrill coaster at Cedar Point. Is that necessarily saying a lot? No, not really, but it's just cool to see Cedar Point really put forth the effort into actually telling the theme that they give a ride. Like for example, Steel Vengeance, they don't really tell you the story of the three outlaws at all unless you know it beforehand. Siren's Curse, with the onboard audio, the cue music, and the creaking noises, you actually understand kind of exactly what's going on with the whole Lake Erie and the Siren situation. The story is obviously not super detailed, and it's not like as you're going throughout the ride, different things in the story are happening, so I still can't give it that much, but I gotta give Cedar Point kudos for being an amusement park and attempting a theme like this. Still nowhere near a true theme park though, like Universal or Disney level standards, so I'm gonna put theming smack in the middle. Up next is presentation, and I love Siren's Curse's presentation. From the audio in the queue, to the onboard audio, to the way they painted the supports, to the way they painted the station, it all just looks fantastic. Siren's Curse also has a good loose article policy where they have free double-sided lockers right before the station, so nobody gets hurt and you get to wait in line with your belongings. It's a win-win for everyone. Where I will ding Siren's Curse just a little bit is for its capacity, just because, well, it can be better. And to be honest, Siren's Curse probably is capable of running 3 trains. Here's how I would set this up. First of all, the curve entering the station after the final brake run. Velocicoaster literally does this, but you can make that curve a block zone and have a train park on it as an extra waiting brake. This way, in case you get stacking, you can have a train in the station, a train on the curve right before the station, and a train in the waiting brake that they have there now. train on the curve would also then be able to enter the station faster, because right now, Siren's Curse suffers from waiting for the train to get from the final brake run into the station, which takes about 10 to 15 seconds per cycle. In an ideal world with 3 trains, you can have one train climbing the lift and parking on the tilt, one traversing the layout and then hitting the final brake run and getting to the curved holding brake that we have there now, and then one loading and unloading, obviously. That's a pretty good 3-train op setup that would easily improve Siren's Curse's capacity from what it is now. I really hope Cedar Point looks into this in the future, because if they do, Siren's Curse will have a max on presentation. But for now, capacity holds it back a little bit. Also, one final thing to add, obviously people have really good inside scoops when it comes to getting roller coaster music uploaded to YouTube, but for some reason, Siren's Curse's Q audio is not available in its raw format on YouTube, and man, if someone could get on that, that would be great, because I really just enjoy standing there and listening to the bells, the siren noises. Somebody get on that, please. Also, this ride looks sick at night. Okay, I gotta move on from presentation. Up next, we have laterals, and Siren's Curse doesn't really focus on laterals at all. If you get any, it's gonna be on that first drop, the dive after the airtime hill, and on that triple down, but they're really not very noticeable, and this is definitely not a main focus of this ride at all. I'm gonna keep it out of the orange just because, like I said, it does have a couple moments where it at least tries, but it's definitely not a focus, and laterals are definitely below average. Up next, we have trains, and man, I'm a big fan of these new Vekomas. They got that sleek, stainless steel look. They're comfortable to sit in. I wish they didn't have the vest, but for something like a tilt coaster, you kind of have to have it, because when you're facing straight down on the tilt, you need some kind of chest support. I really don't have anything bad to say about these other than the vest, which you kind of have for this ride. But I would really like to see Vekoma attempt these trains without vests on some of their other models, like the Super Boomerang or their other full layout models. I really can't believe that these trains are produced by the same people who produced the Vekoma SLC trains. Like I said, I give Vekoma a lot of credit for the changes that they made to their designs. So trains, nearly perfect, but not quite. Up next, we have propulsion. This is just your typical 45-degree lift hill. That does have some nice speed, it's pretty sleek and quiet, so for propulsion, I'm going to score right above the red. Up next, we have positives, and Siren's Curse has a couple decent moments of positives, mainly the curve after the first drop. The curve after the first airtime hill is also not bad. Honestly, Siren's Curse's positives are pretty similar to RMC, although they're a little bit better just because they're a little bit stronger. Like, Siren's Curse has a couple moments where it approaches near 4 Gs. However, these Gs aren't really sustained at all, though, and Siren's Curse definitely does not focus on positives at all. So it's definitely not one of the ride's redeeming qualities. So I'm giving positives right above average, which is a little bit above where I ranked a lot of the RMCs that don't really focus on positives at all. Up next, we have inversions, and Siren's Curse's 2 inversions are really good, the 2 inline rolls that have a different flavor to each of them, but in reality, 2 inversions is 2 inversions, and none of these inversions make your draw drop. They are really fun, though, and I prefer these inversions to a lot of others, especially the cookie cutter B&M ones, but at the end of the day, they really only take up a small portion of the ride and are more of an enhancement rather than the ride's main focus. So for inversions, I'm going slightly above average. 2 inversions is just not enough for this ride in my opinion, and it really could have used a third one, both as an extra element and to increase the ride's duration. I would have loved to see one of those Vekoma stalled Immelmans on this ride. I think that would have fit perfectly in the layout and would have really boosted this inversion score. Up next, we have variety, and Siren's Curse really does do a great job at variety. It's got airtime pops, good inversions, nice twistiness to all of its different airtime moments. There's a lot to like in terms of variety here. The first drop itself is obviously a very unique sensation, giving Siren's Curse the edge on variety out the gate, but in general, all of its airtime moments are different, aside from those 3 pops at the end. I know Siren's Curse's main focus is airtime, but it does a really good job in mixing up with different moments, even if a lot of them are ejector pops. So for Siren's Curse, because it has unique elements like the tilt track, the twisted triple down, and weird transitions such as the turn out of the airtime hill and the airtime knot, I'm going to give Siren's Curse a very good score for variety. Up next, we have maneuvers, and like I said, Siren's Curse's tilt track is absolutely going to carry this maneuver, as it's really the only true maneuver. I know some of its airtime moments do kind of have a maneuver element to them, but if they have airtime, I can't count them as a maneuver. So thus, the only maneuver is a tilt track. But that said, it's one hell of a maneuver. It's an interesting maneuver to be sure, as it happens before the first drop and when the ride really gains speed, but just that tilting sensation, it really is thrilling even if it seems a little gimmicky. It's something that the enthusiast and the GP will enjoy. Just being on a disconnected piece of track that is rising you higher in the air in those back rows, it is just something so unique and something that you just gotta experience to really see what it feels like. So maneuvers, I'm giving above average just because the tilt track is so unique and awesome. Up next, we have smoothness, and I really thought it could never ever get better than the RMC iBox track with their new swing axle trains, but somehow, someway, I was wrong, as this Vekoma track with their new trains runs like absolute butter, to the point where sometimes it doesn't even feel like you're on rails. It feels like the train is just gliding through the air. I really never thought the RMC iBox swing axle train combo could ever be beat, because, well, it's perfect, but Siren's Curse's smoothness is somehow beyond perfect. Whatever the word for that may be. For Siren's Curse, I would put its mark over smoothness off the chart if I could. But of course, it's going to get an absolute 10 out of 10 perfect. It is the one thing that it does better than any other ride I've ever experienced. Up next, we have pacing, and Siren's Curse has a very good pace from the start all the way to the end. From the moment you drop off the tilt to when you hit the final brake run, there's not one element that feels like it's sluggish. There's not one element that doesn't feel like it hits it with the proper speed. At the end of the day, Siren's Curse's pacing is very good. Although it doesn't feel like it's tearing through it like some other roller coasters do, it absolutely does not feel in any way sluggish, even during some of its larger sweeping turns. Siren's Curse has very good pacing, just not super duper excellent like something like Iron Gwazi. And the same can kind of be said for density. It's not non-stop, never catch your breath action like something like Steel Vengeance. It just doesn't have the element count to compete with that. But there's no sweeping wide turns, no straight track. Whenever you're done with one element, you know that the next one can't be far behind. The ride keeps you guessing and engaged from start to finish, and thus both pacing and density score not quite elite, but very, very well. Up next, we have duration, and duration is a little bit of a shortcoming for me for Siren's Curse, as it really could just use that extra 500 to 1,000 feet of track that would have allowed it to have a couple more elements. I said earlier that the drop to brake time is about 55 seconds, and that includes the tilt, and like I said, I think it's completely fair to include the tilt in that time, but at the end of the day, the tilt is taking up 20 seconds of that ride time, leaving only 35 seconds for the remainder of the layout. A 35-second full layout is extremely short, but the tilt adding that 20 seconds really does a lot of heavy lifting in terms of making the drop to brake time seem more respectable. At the end of the day, the length of the tilt track is what makes duration seem slightly above average. The height and speed of this ride are definitely part of the problem, as a lot of people have pointed out, as this ride is pretty tiny for Cedar Point, and that really limits the amount of track that you can actually traverse with good speed. Not to overcomplicate it, I just wish the full layout portion of Siren's Curse just had a few more elements to it. Up next, we have Airtime Strength, and overall, Siren's Curse's average hill delivers strength pretty well. It's really just that airtime knot and that hill to dive that I really wish just delivered a bit more in the negative G department. I don't think the issue is the speed these elements are taken with, as both feel pretty well paced. I just think some slight reprofiling on the next Vekoma installation can really make these hit harder, especially in the back rows where you want the most airtime. So those two elements are going to ding it a little bit, but overall Siren's Curse's strength is still really good, as it really relies on ejector pops that are short duration that hit a high negative G value. Looking back at the force chart, specifically at the pops, all pops hit a negative G value of 0.7 or better, with a lot of them going over 1G. That is very strong, noticeable airtime being received there. So, airtime strength is still going to score very well above average, even though those two big moments really deliver not as much as I think they should. And then finally, we have airtime quantity, and you know that my airtime quantity score is based on two things. Number one, how many airtime moments it has, and number two, how many seconds of airtime are spread across those moments. Siren's Curse does very well at department number 1, with 10 out of its 13 elements being airtime moments, but it doesn't perform very well in department number 2, having only 6 seconds of airtime and being heavily reliant on short, quick airtime pops to generate airtime score. That said, in the grand scheme of roller coasters, 6 seconds is still pretty good, and 146.09 is a very good airtime score. So for airtime quantity, not going to overthink it too much. It's still very good for your typical run-up-the-middle roller coaster. It just doesn't hold up as well compared to some of the other roller coasters I've done so far in this series. I think the main culprit of that is a lot of the roller coasters I've done so far have at least one big sustained ejector airtime moment, which Siren's Curse does not have. It could have that if the hill to dive or the airtime knot actually delivered like I think they could, but they don't. So, Siren's Curse lacks a sustained ejector moment. Overall, Siren's Curse is very well rounded, with its signature tilt in the beginning, airtime pops galore, fun transitions and maneuvers, 2 amazing inversions, a fun and well executed theme for a Six Flags park, and this is all done while gliding on track that may as well be made of actual butter. Siren's Curse currently ranks 70th out of 1,929 roller coasters on the Captain Coaster database, putting it at 96.42%. For me, Siren's Curse comes in at number 14 of my 222 credits. I get the sense that I'm a lot higher on Siren's Curse, as a lot of people like to think it's good, but don't have it in that elite category, but to me, it absolutely belongs in that elite category, with just the airtime pops and the smoothness alone really carrying the day for this ride. And overall, I saw the variety, smoothness, and different elements that these new Vekomas bring to a lineup like Cedar Point. Speaking of Cedar Point, a popular take that I've seen all over the place with this ride is that another park deserved this way more than Cedar Point, but here will be my counter argument to this. First of all, I'm just very happy that this ride actually got built somewhere, whether it be at Cedar Point or any other park in the Six Flags chain. Second of all, with this ride being at Cedar Point, it was either going to sink or swim. And this ride has absolutely swam all the way across Lake Erie and back, if you ask me. We'll see if this holds true, but when I visited in 2025, this ride was absolutely one of the most popular attractions at all of Cedar Point against some very serious competition. And most importantly, this ride absolutely redefines the standard for a new for 2025 roller coaster's reliability. Despite having new technology, the ride operated at over 90% uptime from the time it opened to when the park closed for the season. And so really I think it came down to Six Flags executives said, hey, let's try the tilt coaster at Cedar Point and see how it does. And it passed all tests with flying colors. Six Flags executives, there's really no excuse as to why we shouldn't see more of these in the chain. So at the end of the day, this first one going to Cedar Point could just be the gateway for more of these popping up all over the chain, which I think was the goal of installing it at Cedar Point to begin with. Vekoma produces a product that is unique to all manufacturers right now, and a lot of parks should be lining up to add one of these. Whether it's a tilt coaster, launch coaster, traditional lift coaster, you name it, Vekoma will deliver you a top-end product, as Siren's Curse is certainly that. Currently, I have it lumped in with Top Thrill 2 and Pantheon, and depending on the day you ask me, I may switch them around a little bit, but at the end of the day, Siren's Curse, while not being in my world class of world class, finds itself among some elite roller coasters in my rankings. That'll wrap up CoasterGuy23 review number 7 on Siren's Curse at Cedar Point. If you don't want to have to wait for all my reviews to come out to view my current list of roller coasters, find me on CaptainCoaster.com, username CoasterGuy. To view my coaster count, parks visited, ride stats, and a bunch of other stuff, friend me on LogRide at CoasterGuy23. To view or download any of my RideForce files, visit my profile on RideForce's DB, also at CoasterGuy23. Thank you guys all for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.